Propaganda was used to influence attitudes and reinforce the belief in the achievements of socialism, Stalin, and the Soviet government. It was also used to mobilise support for the regime, and the Soviet regime made sure to capitalise on all outlets for propaganda purposes. Number 1. The Cult of Stalin. After his death, Lenin was hailed as a hero. Towns such as Petrograd were renamed as Leningrad. The Soviet regime, and Stalin in particular, sought to build on Lenin's popularity. Stalin went to great lengths to present himself as the natural heir of Lenin. Through his use of propaganda, Stalin made sure he was viewed as the saviour of socialism against the capitalist element who would undermine the revolution. In pieces of propaganda such as this, Stalin was presented as a hero and a man of the people, pictured alongside workers. Similarly, in pieces such as this, he was presented as down-to-earth, a happy and ordinary man smoking a pipe. In the late 1920s and 1930s, Soviet propaganda focused far more intently on Stalin. In this piece of propaganda, he is presented as the strong leader of Russia, steering Russia to success. Stalin also used propaganda to promote loyalty at the time of war. Stalin sought to present himself as a replacement to the Tsar. He erected statues of himself throughout Russia, and cities such as Stalingrad were named after him. In the end, ideology and propaganda became virtually the same thing. Nothing was divorced from political content. Number 2. Youth organisations. The Soviet government recognised the importance of targeting the attitudes of the young. It was easier to influence the attitudes of young people than those who still remembered Tsarist Russia. They achieved this through setting up a series of youth organisations and the education system. There were groups such as the Octoberists for young people. Groups such as Komsomol were available to 14 to 28-year-olds, and they even had their own newspaper called Pravda. Komsomol, in particular, played a central role in the cultural revolution of the 1930s and was used to attack the class culture. In fact, they were so enthusiastic that the government had difficulty keeping them in control. In 1929, their membership was 2.3 million, and it rose to 10.2 million in 1940. They were also a valuable reservoir of labour. The new education law of 1935 reasserted discipline in school and government control over the curriculum. Government textbooks were introduced, which promoted the regime and the Stalinist viewpoint. Any teachers who were not committed to socialism were removed. Number 3. The media. Government control over newspapers and the radio ensured that the Soviet population received a very narrow range of views. This also served to restrict public debate. Access to printing presses were restricted and radio stations controlled, carrying only the official message. There were 2 leading newspapers, Pravda and Izvestia. They were used to highlight the achievements of Soviet policies, such as the 5-year plans. Number 4. Arts and popular culture. All forms of arts and culture were controlled by the government. Writers and artists were expected to work within the limits laid down by the Soviet government. The rise in educational standards also helped to boost interest and enthusiasm for popular culture. Government manipulation and control of the arts and popular culture was able to work at different levels. It served a range of functions. It was a source of information, it provided entertainment, it was a useful form of escapism, and it offered opportunities for socialising. It was rather more than art for art's sake. This range of functions gave the government many opportunities to use the arts and popular culture to mobilise support for the regime at a range of levels. Number 5. Leisure and public celebrations. The Soviet government made use of public celebrations to mobilise the population. Celebrations of the anniversary of the October Revolution became large government-managed events. There were other achievements that could be used by the government as a source of pride in the Soviet state, such as the achievements of the 5-year plans, and public events were used to celebrate them. Successful expeditions to the Arctic and northern Russia in search of gold and oil were part of a theme which struck a chord with many Soviet citizens: the triumph of technology over nature. The aviators who flew over the North Pole were greeted by Stalin as conquering heroes. They represented bravery, adventure, and the pushing back of frontiers. All organised leisure was run by the state. Sport facilities became widespread in the late 1930s, and leisure activities were to develop into important means of mobilising the population. Football became a mass spectator sport, and Moscow's 2 leading teams, Dynamo and Spartak, developed large followings. Exhibitions were also very popular. Moscow's agricultural exhibition of 1939 attracted 30,000 people every day. Gorky Park in Moscow received hundreds of thousands of visitors at the weekend. The park included a swimming pool, dance area and theatre with seating for 25,000 people. By 1940, there were over 28,000 cinemas in the Soviet Union. Number 6. Political discussions. The government used carefully controlled public debate as a mechanism for mobilising the people and encouraging mass participation. Discussion of the Soviet Constitution in 1936 and the ban on abortions were examples of the use of this strategy. Election campaigns provided other opportunities to discuss and debate policies within the strict framework laid down by the party. The government also used such things as the Stakhanovite movement to build up the hopes of some workers who wanted to improve their status and rewards. The use of words such as wrecker and saboteur by government leaders was picked up by industrial workers who looked for reasons to explain why they were unable to meet the achievements. The factory managers were targeted as easy scapegoats for the lack of available resources. Even more sinister was the government's use of show trials during the Great Terror. They were used by the government as political rituals which mobilised sectors of the population against the class enemy within the Soviet Union.